Thanks for making Locked On Dynasty your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms. Today's episode of Locked On Dynasty is presented by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. Pick 2 to 5 players, and if they score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on your entry. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. That's prizepicks.com, promo code Locked On. Welcome to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan McDowell. You can follow me on Twitter at RyanMC23. Joining me, as always, is Matt Williamson. Find Matt on Twitter at WilliamsonNFL. Matt, how's it going today?
It's going great. How are you?
Going well. We had a good weekend of football. The playoffs were great. Some close games, and we're on to round 2. Matt, we're starting a new, I shouldn't say segment, series, I guess. We're starting a new series today. And this is one we did last year. It was really valuable for me personally, just kind of pulling all this together and looking at this information. But we're going to do team reviews. We'll do every single team in the NFL, essentially from worst to first. So we'll start with the teams that ended with the worst record. We'll talk about how the team did, how the players did, and of course, we'll put a dynasty spin on that. How's that sound, Matt?
I like it. Dig into each one of these teams, kind of project maybe what's going to happen, see what they got, see what they're losing, all that good stuff.
That's it.
Go.
As I said, we're starting with the worst team, and this year, that's the Chicago Bears. Of course, that was decided in the final week of the season as they lost. The Texans won. The Bears finished 3-14. That was, of course, last in the NFC North. You look at their team. It doesn't feel like the worst team in the league. I know they are certainly have a lot of holes, but have some talent as well. And that starts with Justin Fields. Fields ended up with 19.7 fantasy points per game. That was good for the quarterback 5 finish on the season when you're looking at that points per game scoring. He did miss a couple games, including the final game of the season. Ended with 1,143 rushing yards. That's the second most by a quarterback ever. That was also the 7th most among all players, including running backs this season. So he outrushed every running back except for 6 of them. Obviously, a super impressive season for Fields, a breakout season for Fields. He did have 9 games where he was a top 12 quarterback. Looking at the rest of their backfield, David Montgomery, disappointing year, 11.1 fantasy points, was the running back 28. He did end up with 8 top 24 fantasy games. Most of those were RB2 games. He was backed up by Khalil Herbert. Herbert has 9.1 fantasy points and also missed a month of the season. The wide receiver depth chart, you already know, Matt. It's pretty ugly. Darnell Mooney, 8.5 fantasy points, wide receiver 63 on the year, misses 5 games. Chase Claypool, they trade for him right around the deadline, right before week 9, actually. He averages 7 fantasy points. He's the wide receiver 82. His best game as a Bear, 2 catches for 51 yards. They drafted Velus Jones last year. He just gave them a couple fantasy points per game. He was outside of the top 130 fantasy wide receivers. Equanimeous St. Brown, 4 fantasy points per game. Cole Kmet had a solid year, 8.7 fantasy points per game. That was good for the tight end 15 finish. He did have 4 games as a tight end 1. And Kmet, when Fields was really starting to heat up around midseason, Kmet was along for the ride, and then that kind of tailed off. And as we've already mentioned, of course, the Bears do have the number 1 overall pick. I don't think they're using that on a quarterback, but they haven't ruled it out. Matt, when you look at this team as a whole, what stands out here?
Yeah, I mean, they do have the first overall pick, which is a tremendous asset, especially when you don't need a quarterback. I mean, I could see Indy, Carolina, et cetera, giving them a lot of stuff to get up there.
Yeah.
I would think the Bears would love to target Anderson or Carter, and not go too far from number 1 and get a foundational defensive player that doesn't help our cause a whole heck of a lot. They also do not have the first pick in the second round because of the Claypool trade. Fortunately for my Steelers, they snagged that one. I was pretty happy about that. But they do have the Ravens second round pick in the Roquan trade. But they also, as you alluded to, have so many holes. I mean, they traded Quinn, they traded Roquan. I mean, their best defensive players are gone. So I don't know that the whole offseason is going to be make Fields' life as easy as possible. They do have an uncanny amount of cap space, though. And
yes.
What can you do with that? You'd rather have draft assets, to be honest, as a team. But I could absolutely see this as a team that says, we'll take DeAndre Hopkins or Michael Thomas's contract and eat it and, throw them at receiver, or guys like that aren't wanted as much anymore because they're too expensive. Well, we'll pay you 50 cents on the dollar what they're worth and throw them on our roster. So I do think they'll look massively different.
Yeah, we'll talk about the Arizona Cardinals later in the week, I believe, but you did mention DeAndre Hopkins' name. Of course, some trade rumors around him. And the last I saw, the Chicago Bears were actually the betting favorite to be the team that trades for DeAndre Hopkins. So that'll be something fun to see how that plays out this season. I think it's pretty obvious when you look at this roster and kind of shifting over to that dynasty mindset. Justin Fields is the best thing this team has going, and it's not necessarily really close. That backfield, I'm wondering what to do. David Montgomery is, as I mentioned, a free agent. Did have the disappointing year. He's posted some things on social media that make it sound like he's ready to find a new home. What are you doing with Montgomery, and what do you think about Khalil Herbert? Can he be a guy who could step in where maybe the Bears are worrying about their receiver core, their needs on offensive line or defense, and maybe running back isn't the priority? Could Khalil Herbert be the starter for this team next year?
I think there's a real good chance of it. I mean, if I were in charge of an NFL rebuild, running back would be my last piece. But you have so much cap space. If Montgomery's sitting out there 3 weeks into free agency, come on back, we'll give you a 1-year deal, run it back, and we'll split carries with you and Herbert. I like Montgomery, but I'm also not sure that Herbert's not the better player. And the volume's going to be heavy in this offense. They're going to run the ball a lot, maybe not the highest percentage, as high a percentage as they did this year. And of course, Fields is a big piece of that. But I want Herbert. I was about to ask you, do you think Herbert or Kmet is their second most valuable dynasty asset? I think it's Herbert.
That's a good point. If you're already putting David Montgomery off this roster,
or maybe, I mean, they're going to have some other back in the backfield. He's not going to have it himself.
I mean, honestly, Montgomery, Herbert, Darnell Mooney, you can throw Claypool in there if you still believe in him. Cole Kmet. I mean, I'm not excited to go out and acquire any of those guys, honestly.
Right.
I mean, you kind of laid it out earlier, but it feels like this is going to be a long rebuild. They're not. I don't think, at least, they're going to be competitive in 2023. Of course, some other teams have surprised us with quick turnarounds in recent years. So maybe it's the Bears' turn, but I don't really see it. I guess I would probably take Mooney as my second most valuable Chicago Bear, and I don't even like him that much, to be honest. We're going to move on here, Matt. I don't want to talk about the Bears anymore. I do want to ask you this, actually. Do you expect them to trade down out of that first overall pick?
I absolutely do. I mean,
it does seem like every mock draft that's out there is projecting a trade down to the Colts or the Raiders or someone.
So I know we didn't quite get to this, but I think Claypool would be my most disappointing player. I mean, trust me, I watched every snap of him as a Steeler and did not think he's much of an asset.
Yeah, certainly disappointing. I talked about the disappointment for Montgomery. There's a lot of disappointment to go around in Chicago. Matt, we're going to talk about the team with the second overall pick. That's the Houston Texans, and we'll do that right after this.
First, let me tell you about Prize Picks. I've told you about them often. I'm a big fan. I love that you're not playing against other people that might just get lucky. It's just kind of you versus the numbers that Prize Picks presents you. And you get to pick between 2 and 5 players. And if they will score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, it's that easy. Are they more or are they less? And you can win up to 10 times your money on any of those entries. I love that you don't compete against other people. And I pretty much stick to NFL. But if you know some of these lesser known sports like cricket, Euro basketball, disc golf, tennis, even soccer, WNBA, I think you'd clean up with Prize Picks. And of course, you can do all the major NFL, NBA, et cetera, et cetera. Your entries are done in 60 seconds or less. It's really simple, safe and fast withdrawals. Right now, Prize Picks is operational in over 30 states as well as Canada. So download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That's all one word. If you deposit $100, Prize Picks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, Prize Picks will give you $50. So just don't forget to enter that promo code Locked On to get the instant deposit match up to $100.
Thanks again for making Locked On Dynasty your first listen every day. Subscribe to the Locked On NFL podcast and get daily conversations on the biggest NFL stories, plus in-depth analysis of the biggest games with NFL key predictions every Friday. And Monday, local insiders cover the weekend with game-to-game episodes. Locked On NFL, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. All right, Matt, let's talk about the Houston Texans. This team just, Matt, they just kept finding ways to mess this up. And I mean, call it Lovie Smith's revenge, call it whatever you want. They find a way to win on the final week of the season. They move out of that 101 slot. And I mean, we talked about the Bears. We don't think they're drafting a quarterback. And I know that's going to be a narrative that people want to talk about all off season, but I think most likely that pick is traded. The good news for the Texans, though, is it looks like right now there's at least 2 top quarterbacks, maybe even 3, depending on how you value those players. The Texans are going to have a quarterback to choose here. Maybe not the one they wanted, but they're going to have some options. Do you think that's the way they go? Do they have to start at that position?
I assume so. I mean, I'd like to know the coach first. That's one of the hard things about this exercise is, to get it all in, we don't know exactly who's making the decisions. I doubt they'll take the Garoppolo Carr path. That makes very little sense to me, considering you are picking in the top 2. So especially
Carr.
Right. Good point.
They've had enough Carr.
Yeah, that is very true. I do think, though, this is just a side note before it slips my mind. I would go buy Davis Mills in Superflex, especially once it gets pretty clear that they're taking a quarterback, because I think he's going to last in this league a long time, and this is about as low as his stock can go.
Really?
As a backup.
Yeah, I mean, I guess he's cheap enough, and we've said it on here that in most Superflex Dynasty leagues, your top backups are rostered, even before you need them, before there's an injury. So, yeah, I guess I get that, and he's certainly going to be cheap. But
that's what I mean. A throw-in.
I mean, it was ugly. Let's look at that depth chart and the roster for the Houston Texans. It is Davis Mills at quarterback. He did sort of lose his job late in the season as they went to essentially a 2-quarterback system. But Mills ends up with 11.4 fantasy points per game on the season. That was just good for the quarterback 36 finish. He did have 3 games as a QB1, as a top 12 quarterback. Honestly, I was surprised it was that high. The backfield, and this is where you get a little bit of good news for the Houston Texans. Rookie Dameon Pierce had a very solid year and it's probably a surprising year. 12.8 fantasy points. That was the RB21 in a points per game view. Had over 1,000 total yards, 5 touchdowns, and that was even with missing 4 games during the season. Pierce also gave us 9 games as a top 24 running back. So a really good start to Dameon Pierce's career. You look at their wide receiver depth chart. It's Brandon Cooks and Nico Collins. Not much after that. And these 2 guys were pretty similar in their production. Cooks, 10.3 fantasy points. Wide receiver, 49. Collins, 9.7. Wide receiver, 52. Cooks has made it very clear he does not want to be a part of this team any longer. There were rumors that he would be traded.
Maybe he goes to the Bears.
Yeah, he's going
Hopkins and Cooks.
Yeah, he's going somewhere. It seemed like he was going to be traded or maybe even cut late in the season. Or I guess traded at the deadline and then cut later in the season. Felt like it was going to be an option. He ends up coming back to play the last couple games, but even since the season has ended, Cooks has again made it clear he does not want to be part of this rebuild of the Houston Texans. Nico Collins, he's fine.
He's all right.
He's fine.
He might be okay. A 2. Yeah. They did Mechie as well.
Oh, yeah. I was going to say they did draft John Mechie a year ago, who was a player a lot of people liked coming out of Alabama. Of course, had the medical issue non-related to football. I believe that was I think
it was leukemia. A form of cancer.
Yeah. A form of cancer. Sounds like there hasn't been a ton of news about his situation until just the past couple of weeks since the season ended. And it does sound positive. Sounds like he's going to be able to resume his playing career, which is obviously good news and more important than fantasy football by a long ways. The tight end depth chart is really something for the Houston Texans. They had 4 guys that had some type of production throughout the year, and it was just a carousel with these guys. Jordan Akins, OJ Howard, they brought in after he bounced around the league a little bit. Brevin Jordan, rookie, Tegan Quintoriano, I believe. Probably.
I hadn't heard of him until he caught a touchdown late in the year or whatever. Yeah,
he did. None of these guys finished higher than tight end 26. None averaged more than 7 fantasy points per game. But I believe all of them, I know Akins, Jordan, and Quintoriano all had a tight end 1 game thrown in there. So they had some level of production. Who knows what we get going forward. Akins and OJ Howard are free agents, so probably at least one of those, maybe both, are moving on, and they look at Jordan and the rookie to carry that moving forward.
Maybe if it's a Mayer spot or a second round tight end spot too. I mean, but they need so much. I mean,
yeah. Well, I mean, we expect Mayer to be a pretty, or Michael Mayer, of course, out of Notre Dame. We expect him to be a pretty high pick. The Texans do have the 12th overall pick along with the 2nd. They get that from the Cleveland Browns and the Deshaun Watson trade. So yeah, maybe 12 is a Mayer spot. But like you said, so many needs on this team.
They go a lot of directions.
Absolutely. Matt, when we come back, we'll get a little bit more into the Houston Texans, what some of their needs are and what we should be doing from a dynasty standpoint.
BetOnline is your number 1 source for sports betting information, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there. Pro football, college football season, basketball, World Cup was great with them as well. We've got it all on betonline.net. If you love sports podcasts, I'm sure you do. You can even find those on BetOnline as well. We're always the fastest and easiest way to get your betting info. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts.
All right, Matt, we're talking Houston Texans. We are starting our team review. We'll do every single team over the next several weeks. And we're starting with the Bears and the Texans. Matt, who's the one Houston Texan you want? I think there's only one, right?
I assume it's Pierce. He's a quality back. I like him a lot. The one thing that worries me, and he does catch the ball, is you don't want to be an early down back on a terrible team. I mean, that's a tough road to hoe. But yeah, I think he's a valuable asset. I think Collins has some upside. Whoever they draft will have some upside. I mean, that's kind of the move is who do they go get, obviously.
Yeah, I think that's probably the actual answer is their most valuable dynasty asset is whoever they take at 2 overall, or if it's an offensive player, if it's a receiver, or if it's Michael Mayer, maybe it's that 12 overall pick as well. I don't really think it's any of these. I would call Dameon Pierce their most valuable dynasty player. Sure. I would also say he's the number 1 sell on this team. The player I would be looking to move this offseason really for the reasons you've already mentioned that, yeah, he did catch the ball a little bit, but I think, I'm having visions of Michael Carter and James Robinson and Elijah Mitchell as those players. Ouch. I mean, that's the reality, right?
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it in that light, but I think he's a better football player than them, but pretty easy to get down that road.
Yeah, and then when you factor in the status of their team overall and that they're going to be losing games for the next year or two, that makes it even worse. I would certainly be shopping Dameon Pierce pretty hard this offseason.
That's a good call.
What about you? Any players on this team you want to buy? You mentioned Nico Collins. Do you believe in him enough to?
I don't know if he can ever
go
get
out
to the
and trade for him.
Yeah, but more of a throw in or a package deal situation, a bigger trade.
Okay.
I just don't know if he can ever get to the status where you can check the box Sunday morning as a starter. I mean, he's pretty far from that, and I assume they'll draft over his head at some point or sign somebody or. They'll get more draft assets for Cook as well. I don't think, maybe if Cook gets traded tomorrow, then I would trade Nico the next day with people saying, oh, maybe he's going to be the one this year. I don't think he's that guy, but I think he's a good player and a good prospect.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. I do think we'll see Brandon Cooks eventually be traded or even released. And when that happens, you've got a window to trade Nico Collins, and you're not getting a ton. Maybe you get a late second, or you package him with a third to get that second. Maybe even take a couple of thirds. I would consider doing that. I don't really see a player I want to buy on this roster at all from a dynasty standpoint, which is kind of scary for this team, honestly.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, hopefully it's an offensive-minded head coach that's got a track record of developing quarterbacks, and then we could use a little bit of foresight to say, okay, now I see what the plan is for the first time in forever, and if this quarterback is developed properly, then Nico or tight end X or whoever could really rise in value. But as we sit here in the middle of January, that's a bit of a squint.
Yeah, it really is. Well, we've started with the two worst teams in the league, the Bears and the Houston Texans. It will only get better.
Nowhere to go but up. Yeah.
As we continue our series of 2022 team reviews, we'll look back on every single NFL team, along with a little previewing what their offseason might look like as well. That is it for today's show. Please make sure you download and subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. Remember to follow the show at Locked On Dynasty. Follow Matt at Williamson NFL, and I'm Ryan MC23. We'll be back next time with more Locked On Dynasty.